Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Recovery Corner. We are your host, Candace Rose.
And I am, as always, Jesse Hayner.
Sometimes you're not.
Sometimes I'm not.
Really happy to have you all tune in today. On today's episode of Recovery Corner, we are discussing positive messaging and the importance of language within the scope of recovery in order to combat stigma. So stigma is defined as a set of negative beliefs that a group or society holds about a topic or a group of people. And according to the World Health Organization, stigma is a major cause of discrimination and exclusion, and it also contributes to the abuse of human rights. The concept of stigma describes the powerful negative perceptions commonly associated with substance use and addiction. Stigma has the potential to negatively affect a person's self-esteem, damage relationships with loved ones, and prevent those suffering from addiction from accessing treatment. So with all of this in mind, we have invited the Executive Director of Advocates for Recovery in Colorado onto the show to dive deeper into this conversation. Welcome to the show, Ms. Tonya Wheeler.
Yeah.
Thanks, Candace and Jesse. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Heck yeah, I know we're excited. We've been talking for about a half an hour pre-record here, and it's been nice getting to know you and having some laughs and kind of sharing with us your background and stuff. But got a lot of cool stuff going on there in Colorado. And what part of Colorado are you in again?
So I live in the Denver metro area.
Okay. Well, I won't hold it against you. I'm a Raiders fan. We don't like the Denver Broncos, as always. But
you know what? I'm okay with that, Jesse, because I'm from Texas.
That's right.
And you can take the girl out of Texas, but you can't take the Texas out of the girl. And I am a lifetime Dallas Cowboys fan.
Oh my goodness! So you saw what happened on Thanksgiving, right?
I did. I don't want to talk about that.
Oh, okay. I don't want to trigger you. Okay.
Oh, did they win? Because I was like texting Jesse. I was all, I see your Raiders, and right then, it was like the last 2 minutes of the game. Right then, Dallas scored and tied it up.
Yeah. I'm like, why you're jinxing it? Stop texting me, Candace. She's like, my bad. I take football serious, Tonya. Like my Raiders.
Oh, me too.
I've lived with 35 years of disappointment, right? So, yeah. So when Candace texted me, she's like, I see your Raiders, and then she's like, oh, they're doing good. And right when she texted that, you guys scored. I was pissed. But I blame Candace. It was Candace's fault.
Awesome.
Well, hey, it's all good. So you know about disappointment too. You're a Cowboys fan, and we were talking about that before. But we'll get more into football later. But super awesome, super excited to have you on the show today. I am excited just based off what we were talking about. We have a lot of similarities. I'm excited to get into it, and we can just jump in from there. So, Tonya, today we're going to talk about kind of your personal story. And then we'll lead it to like what you're doing now, your beliefs, and what you're doing in your community and all that jazz. So with that being said, Tonya, go ahead and jazz hands. Thank you, Candace. The jazz hands.
Right. I had a cheerleader.
Yeah, there you go. So, kind of tell the nice folks listening or watching about yourself. And you've already said you're from Texas, so I guess we start there. That's a good spot to start.
So I am a woman living in active and sustained recovery. And for me, that means that I have not used drugs or drank alcohol in over 31 years. And that's a super long time. I can't even believe it's been that long. I came into recovery when I was 22 years old. And, I'm one of those people that everything I do, it seems it's go big or stay home, right?
Yes, all the way.
Yes. And so I picked up my first drink and was able to start drinking the way I wanted to drink at 12 years old, which is really young.
Yes.
But I had an older sister, and so that gave me some access to alcohol and so on. From 12 until I was 18. The only things I knew about substance use were drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana. And one of the things that's very ironic about my story is at 12, when I got to drink as much as I wanted, that very first time I blacked out. I got sick. I passed out. I was puking my guts out, and I woke up the next morning with a hangover. And what I can tell you is that 10 years later, when I found recovery, my last drink was identical to that.
Oh, wow.
So I drank as much as I wanted. I was, sick and puking and blacked out and passed out and woke up the next morning with a hangover. And something happened that day. I had been exposed to 12-step meetings, and I had been exposed to treatment. And for some reason, that day is when it sort of all melded together. And I thought to myself, laying in bed that morning, I am an alcoholic and I cannot use any substances if I want my life to change for the better.
Right.
But before we got there, I started drinking first, and then the people I was hanging out with, I got introduced to marijuana. And one of the things I always tell is that I wanted to be grown really fast in my teen years.
Right. We all do.
Right. Well, I didn't have time for things like going to school. Who had time for that? I wanted to party and drink and use. And at 15, I met this guy, and one of the constants in my story is that I have a series of I met this guy throughout my story, and started seeing this guy and got pregnant at 15.
Wow.
And talked to my parents, and it was the whole, but I love him. And so they signed the papers for us to get married. And I had my first baby when I was 16 years old. I really thought that if I just had all that stuff, my life would be good with the white picket fence. And my parents, God bless my daddy. I am a huge daddy's girl. My parents were married until the day that my mother took her last breath. And so I had remarkable role models in that regard. I really thought that life was just about, falling in love, getting married, having kids, and living happily ever after. The problem with that scenario with me was the drugs and the alcohol. And so, becoming a mom and being a wife by the time I was 16,
wow.
I started out pretty good. Like I quit high school to have the baby and all of that, but I got my GED actually before my senior class graduated from high school. And, I had all of these great dreams and goals, but for me, substances always came ahead of anything else that was my goal. And, I didn't set out like that. I that's not what I wanted my life to look like, but it was like I just didn't even have any control from the time I was 12 years old until I stopped using substances. So fast forward, and at 18, I get introduced to methamphetamine. And methamphetamine changed my life. Again, sort of back to that go big or stay home thing. The people who I was with who introduced it to me for the first time were actually injecting the meth, and somehow convinced me that was the only way to do it. And so from the first time I ever did methamphetamine, I shot it.
Wow.
And, I realized there are a lot of people that build to that place, but just like with my drinking, there was no build. It was boom.
Wow.
And it was there.
That was at 18, Tonya?
At 18 years old.
Was your husband, was this in the house, or was your husband partaking, or no?
No, actually, interestingly, my parents had opened a donut shop.
Nice.
And you had to make donuts in the middle of the night. And the girl, unknowingly to them, that they hired who had experience at working in a donut shop, was using meth. And was running with a pretty rough crowd. And that's what drew me in with her. Okay. And that's how the first use happened, was her saying to me, hey, come out to the house before we go to work tonight. I got something for you. And so that's really how all that transpired.
It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And what started out as really innocence. I know there are a lot of people that say, well, with addiction, you make a choice and you decide to be an addict, and none of that stuff is right. That was not my intention when I first used meth. So what I can tell you is it took hold immediately. The husband that I had gotten married to at 15, and the father of my first little girl, was not using meth and was pretty opposed to me doing it. And so, in true form of the way we live our lives when we're living in addiction, I got up one morning and told him he was leaving, because honestly, he was in the way of my drug use. And as I look back, I have to be really honest about that. That was really the reason. After that, I would get involved with a guy who was dealing, and every girl's fantasy in the drug lifestyle is to date the dealer, because that gives you free access to all the drugs you want.
Right.
And so I got involved with him, and I actually got married to him after I got divorced from the first guy, and had another little girl. And I had her at 19. So life was moving really, really fast for me. All the while, I can remember reflecting back to my parents and thinking, why isn't this working? How come I can't just get married, have the kids, have the house, and live happily ever after? And really oblivious to the fact that the drugs and the alcohol is what was making the difference in that. And so my parents actually, before I had my second daughter, took custody of my first daughter. And, I've done a lot of speaking and conversations with like child welfare caseworkers and attorneys and stuff. And, there's that belief system that says, if I'm a mom and I'm using drugs and I lose custody of my child, that means I love the drugs more than I love my child. And I am here to tell you guys in your audience that that is not true, that I loved my kids every single day. And what my parents taking her from my custody really helped me to be able to do was to know that she was taken care of. And so it enabled my drug use to increase and my alcohol use.
Right.
Because it's not about love, it's about addiction. And so, eventually, really right before I turned 21, I knew I was going to die. I weighed 100 pounds. My whole life surrounded my addiction and my drug use and my alcohol use. I was married to the dealer. My parents had a restraining order against me. I come from a family that is very, very close. And so that was a huge impact. And I just knew. I knew that I was going to die, and I wasn't going to be able to be a part of my girls' lives, and I was going to be gone. And I reached out for help. Who I reached out to was my mom, and she was super supportive. And my parents had actually moved away from the town where I was raised. I was raised in Paris, Texas, where there really is an Eiffel Tower with a big red cowboy hat on top of it.
That's the main attraction in Paris, Texas.
Right. Yes, that's it. And I moved from there to another town about that size, further east, in Texas, a town called Marshall. So I moved there with my parents and I started into treatment again. By this time, I had been in treatment twice already, but I was not interested in recovery. I was doing it just to get somebody off my back.
Right.
And so I went to treatment and I moved away from all the people I knew. And I lived with my parents for a while. And that really, those things were a combination of the blessing, right? That really helped me to get to a place where I understood that recovery was the only way that I was going to live. And I understood for me that the only way that I was going to be successful was if I was practicing abstinence. So, when I decided to make that change, I think about the things that enabled me to be able to do that. And I definitely have to admit that moving was one of the positives. I work with people all the time here now that this is where they drank and used, and this is where they're living in recovery. And I just, I want to bow to them and go, whoa, because I don't know if I could have done that.
Right.
Anyway, I started meeting people in recovery and I was introduced to 12-step meetings. And in 1989, when I started this process.
That's when I was born.
Thanks, Candace. I feel really old now.
You've been in sustainable long-term recovery for your whole life. Yeah. I was born in 86, so I was 2.
All right. Well, there you go. I just didn't get it. I wanted to pick and choose which drugs to let go of. I came into recovery saying I'm not an alcoholic because the meth had really taken the front seat in my addiction. And it wasn't until I stopped using meth that I was able to see my addictive behavior with alcohol and marijuana. And so it took a while. But initially I was exposed to 12-step groups. And, back that long ago, that's all we had. We didn't have all these different pathways of recovery for people to engage in. And so I will admit that I am still a 12-step girl. And I still have a home group. I still go to my home group every Saturday morning. It's a women's meeting in Golden. I still have a sponsor and I still actively work the steps. And and we'll talk more about this later, but I also understand there are a lot of other ways that people find their recovery and maintain their recovery besides 12-step groups. Mm-hmm. For me, it was what I needed. It gave me a connection. It gave me people to learn how to trust. And my relationship with my first 12-step sponsor, her name was Mildred. And she was in her 60s and I was in my early 20s. And I listened to people say, look for a sponsor that you have things in common with. And that woman she had never worked a day in her life. Her family owned a very successful business in Marshall, Texas. She played bridge with her friends every week. And I can assure you she had never used methamphetamine. But what she had done is that she had found a solution to her alcoholism. And what I will tell you today is that woman saved my life. And it was like having another mom in my life. And my kids called her Momo because that's what her grandkids called her. And her and I would spend the rest of her life together, being close to the point, really, it got to where we were like mother and daughter. rather than sponsor and sponsee. So I just always have to give a shout out to Mildred. She is now going to the big meetings in the sky. And I miss her every day, but she really armed me with the solutions to be able to maintain my recovery.
I could tell by the way you talk about her, there's a special connection with somebody, especially in 12-step program when it comes to sponsorship.
Yeah.
It's something about my friends in recovery, not even 12-step, recovery in general. There's something spiritual about your tribe in recovery. Yeah. It is a second family. And I don't just mean 12-step, whatever form of recovery you're in. I feel like I have my family, even on like Thanksgiving, it was me and grandma. But then when I went to my meeting, I was at my family's again. There's something about sponsorship and recovery. These people we will have the rest of our lives. And to be honest, if it wasn't for recovery, me and half these people would never even be hanging out. Like, one guy's a lawyer, one guy's like, he's like a puppeteer for a living. He does like puppets. We're just totally, yeah.
You make a living doing that?
He does. He's really good at it. He travels. He does like shows, and
that's so cool.
He's a gangster with it. But to your point, or what I was trying to say is, I could see the passion and the love you have for your sponsor, and it's like we're responsible for passing that down, And so,
agree.
I always think about my sponsor when you were saying that, and shout out to Tony. He's just taken me under like his little brother. He's only got a few years over me, but still there's like this connection, there's nothing like it. I've never experienced the source of family, especially coming from me, where my whole life I'm so insecure. I just want to belong, right? And we always say here at YPR, the opposite of addiction is connection, and so I have connection now. And it seems like you found that with your sponsor.
I did, absolutely.
Well, so you're 12 years old. You open the wormhole with this this experience of drinking, and then you're 22 and you sort of close the portal by having the same, it's like you have the same
Tonya,
concoction.
do you need to pause?
Yeah.
Hold on, Candace.
All right, so here we are back. We've closed the portal. You have found a lifestyle of recovery. And now fast forward to present day, you're the executive director of Advocates for Recovery Colorado.
Nice.
Which I notice on your logo, there's an aspen leaf. I love aspen leaves. I've got them.
Is that what that is?
Awesome.
Yeah, so
it's an aspen.
Yeah, so Jesse, you're not from Colorado, but aspens for me hold a pretty significant meaning. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the meaning behind the aspen leaf?
Sure. So the aspen trees, as you know, Candace, grow in groves. And the root system, which is all underground, all connects together to grow new groves of aspen trees. And that's the way we see recovery, sort of piggybacking on what you were saying, that at YPR, you guys always say that connection is the opposite of addiction. And we believe that too at AFR Colorado. And so that visual of those root systems all connecting together to make the grove or the community bigger and bigger and bigger is why we chose the aspen leaf as our logo.
I love it.
Yeah, aspen are great. They're beautiful trees. When the wind blows, they make a really pretty sound.
Oh, go
ahead.
Sorry. The only thing about aspen I know is the only thing I know about aspen is because of Dumb and Dumber, because that's where Floyd and they went, we're going to Aspen. So that's the only thing I know. Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
Well, it's
random sidebar.
It's named after the trees, but The other really cool thing about Aspen too, and why I got them tattooed is because every year Aspen shed their leaves. They turn really pretty yellow, and some of them are orange and red. They get really beautiful. They drop all their leaves, and then they make room for new growth in the springtime. So just also like another, good representation of kind of letting go of the old to make room for the new.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
But anyways,
we're learning today on Recovery Corner. We're learning about trees. You didn't think you were getting any information, and you guys are
You're
like a walking. It's like a walking Snapple fact around here.
Yeah, those are fun facts, but yeah, we're not here to learn about trees. So Tonya, I want to let's talk about how Advocates for Recovery came to be. Like, how did that part of your journey begin?
Yeah. Well, so my recovery date is May 23rd, 1990 is when I figured out that I agree that abstinence had to be the way for me. And I immediately started saying and said to my counselor in treatment, I'm going to be a counselor when I grow up. And she said, yeah, sure you are. And because, we still see so many people that say that.
Oh, I'm not going to lie. I think that's like, I don't know if there's a timeline on it, but I'm just going to say like after 3 months or so, that's a pretty popular train of thought for people. And I think it's a great train of thought. If people can follow through, the world would benefit more from, people that have the lived experience to be able to kind of shine a light for those needing support. But yeah, that is definitely like.
Yeah. Well, and I'm really grateful, Candace. What she said to me was, okay, if you're serious about that, go maintain your recovery for 2 years. Build your own foundation, figure out where you fit in the grand scheme of things in recovery, and make sure that you have your own strong foundation built. And if in 2 years you still feel like that's what you want to do, come back and see me and I'll tell you how to enroll in college and how to start that process. And I honestly went back to her office on my 2nd year anniversary of my recovery and said, I want to be a counselor. And so she began to walk me through that. And I was still in Texas at that time. And so I started working in a treatment center as a tech or an aide, which was really a glorified babysitter, in 1992 in a residential treatment program. And I started going to college. But ultimately in 1997, I got my license to be a chemical dependency counselor in the state of Texas. In 1999, I moved to Colorado and took care of all the requirements for me to maintain my recovery, my counseling status in the state of Colorado. So when I moved here, I was still a drug and alcohol counselor and worked as a counselor until the fall of 2009. Now, AFR Colorado started initially in 2001 with a handful of people that came together and said, we need to have a voice for the recovery community. And somehow, I don't even remember how, but I got invited to that table after like on the 2nd or 3rd month of them meeting, and I've never left. So I've always been here. So I am considered a founding board member.
Nice.
And I have seen it all the way through. In the fall of 2009, I went to the board I was the board president. I went to the board of directors and said, I don't want to be a counselor anymore. I really think what I said to them is, I believe we're doing God's work. And I think I'm willing to step out on a limb here and quit my job as a counselor to become the director at AFR Colorado. Honestly, they all sort of giggled and looked around the room because we had gotten what is called a challenge grant from a foundation here in Colorado. And we had, I don't know, $70,000 in the bank or something. And they said, Tonya, what are you going to do if this doesn't work? And I said, then, a year from now, we'll all sit around this table again and laugh and go, well, that was stupid. And I'll go back to work as a counselor. But I really had faith.
Good optimism, Tonya.
Right.
Good optimism. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey,
I really
miss
had
100
faith.
Right? Well, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So
absolutely.
Wayne Gretzky.
So I actually walked away from a counselor's job. I was working for the University of Colorado, making decent money, and I had great benefits.
Buffalo.
Stopped working there and agreed to make $2,000 a month from AFR with no benefits and just that blind faith that I'd learned how to have in recovery. I've maintained that belief and that attitude that we're doing God's work and we're doing good stuff. And, I try to stay humble enough to say to my higher power, if you get done with AFR doing your work, I'm okay with that. Just let me know. But that's not been the case, as you guys know from being with YPR. I don't think any of us are gonna ever work ourselves out of a job. Unfortunately, the disease of addiction is worse instead of better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that is the goal, right? The goal is that these services become available, not just available, but accessible,
right,
to where people are able to get the help they need. But I mean, I think we all know we sort of have we completely have a broken system. And not only is the system broken, but then we have this whole concept of stigma. And while I think a lot of us have helped shift the narrative a little bit, there's still a majority of people that have a stigma and don't understand sort of the science behind substance use disorder, the correlation between trauma and substance use disorder. So I really think, especially those of us that have experienced that stigma, we can really move the needle forward by speaking out loud, but not just speaking out loud. And we'll kind of dig more into this, but like choosing our words wisely so that we're not further perpetuating the stigma. And I think I mentioned earlier too, it's not just stigma towards people experiencing addiction. I mentioned I was like afraid to get involved in recovery because I had stigma towards the recovery community. Right. I thought it was this particular type of person that was not like me. I found out soon after when I stepped into a room. I was like, oh, these are all just
you see it from everybody that comes in the rooms. It's like they kind of sit down in the back and they're kind of like, okay, because like our perception of recovery. And, shout out to my friend Pete from CCAP, who's our credentialing here in California for AOD. I'm in the AOD field as well, Tonya. I've been a counselor for 8 years. And so, I know about that, and hats off to you. Burnout is real, so up until YPR, shout out to all my counselors out there, by the way, you're doing a good job. But, there's a stigma. It's like, and Candace, you hit the nail on the head. We think like if someone says, oh, I'm in recovery, automatically they just assume it's like, oh, you go to those places where you sit in a circle, right? And there's like this stigma. Recovery is so much more than the rooms, right? It's a continuum. I don't even like saying a spectrum. It is a continuum. We actually have a pretty cool chart at YPR of what a recovery community looks like and what that could see. It's housing, it's social, it is the rooms, it's connection, it's employment, it's all these things, man. So it's more than just
the circle is where it's at. That's what we didn't know before. It's where it's at, man. Where you want to be.
Yeah. And a lot of people really believe, and this is just a lack of knowledge, that just putting down the drugs and the alcohol equals recovery. And that is not true in my mind. And I think that that's what we need to be teaching people, is that is just the first step in recovery. Like I can't do all those things like have stable housing and hold down a job or go to school or any of that other stuff if I don't put down the drugs and alcohol first.
Right.
But it certainly is not the end, it's the beginning of my recovery to do that.
Right. Well, it's almost like a chicken and the egg thing, what comes first, because a lot of people are utilizing substances, taking substance to like fill a void, like they don't feel like they have purpose or passion. And by doing things like continuing education or finding gainful, purposeful employment, like that would fill that hole that would then take the desire away to use substances. So it is like, it's hard to sustain being a student or going to a job when you're actively using. But that like it's not an easy thing to do, but
it's not. And I think that when we talk about stigma, that one of the first things we need to do as being ourselves, people that are in recovery, is that we need to become aware of how we ourselves are driving some of that stigma against the community.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, so for me, being a 12-step girl, taking the language out of like a 12-step meeting and using it out in the public and out in the world it does not do us any favors because the conversations we have together, because we understand and have walked in each other's shoes, should be very different from when we're trying to educate our community about recovery or we're trying to share a message of hope about recovery.
Right.
There's, some words that I think of that off the top of my head that we need to stop using first in our own community and then stop using those out in the open community, because what people think we mean and what we mean are often two different things. So the term alcoholic,
thank you.
The term addict, those are very negative connotations with those words. When I tell people that I'm a woman living in recovery and what that means for me,
the stigma changes.
It's a completely different message. And like we listen to people talk about urine screens and breathalyzers that are clean and dirty. Well, those things aren't clean and dirty. They're negative and positive. And that's the way we need to be talking about them so that what we're saying is understood.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you said that. I actually have taken that expression, and I'll be the first to admit it to our audience and my peers and everybody else and my coworkers. I raised my hand in those rooms and said I'm an addict or alcoholic, and I don't do that anymore. And I respect the program, but I say I'm a person in long-term recovery. And some people kind of shrug at it, but I think it's very important that this thing catches, because it is a stigma behind saying this. And especially when you're either going in the workforce, what sounds better if you're at a job interview and someone's like, what's this gap in your history? It's well, I'm a person in long-term recovery now, right? Rather than saying, well, I'm an alcoholic or addict, and that definitely just sends off different flags, so I totally agree.
Yeah. I think that, when we begin to really identify the ways that we can reduce the stigma, not only amongst ourselves, our friends and our family members and our allies, but just out in the world, when we talk different, the message is different. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is really so important for people to learn that shift in the language. And I do that a little bit different from you, Jesse. I do use the language of the 12-step group when I'm there,
right?
Because I don't want to set myself apart from
Right.
the rest of the group.
Yep.
But when I'm out in public, when I'm talking as the executive director of AFR Colorado or as a woman in long-term recovery, I have to be able to describe that in such a way that
Right.
people understand. And Faces and Voices of Recovery, years back, I want to guess 2013, did a survey with people that were not in recovery and asked people, what do you think people mean when they say to you, I'm an addict or I'm an alcoholic, and some of those other terms? And the most common response was, if you or me say that, it means we're still struggling
Right.
with our addiction.
Right.
And that's not the message we're trying to put out there.
Right.
So I think really looking at the data and the research and what that has shown is critically important.
Absolutely. And I agree. You are right. You don't want to set yourself apart, right? We want to find similarities, as it says. I'm very cautious of when and where I do that. So if it's like if it's an old school type of meeting, an old timer, I don't want to ruffle feathers. So I will, when in Rome, I will say that. But I'm very cognitive when I'm in the community to use different phrases and different approaches.
So I think one of the other places where it's so important that this language changes too is when we're talking about funding, and we're talking about addiction being a health issue, not a moral issue. And so I think that the language we use also can impact it from that perspective.
Oh, definitely. So I just wanted to backtrack a little. So with language within a recovery setting, so I had this experience, and it's really funny because I think, Tonya, yesterday when we were in that meeting I brought up, I just had this article handy. This article is from 3 years ago. I look really
concerned. You.
Look
at Candace. Is that Cruz?
That's Cruz, yeah.
Shout out to my dog, Cruz.
Yeah, so that's from 3 years ago. So it was interesting because this meeting that they came in and took photos of, the topic I decided to discuss that evening was, in fact, this was 3 years ago. The topic of that meeting was about identifying in recovery and using different language. And there was like over 30 people at that meeting that evening, handful of people from 12-step meetings. And I actually really upset a few people.
I bet you did.
I mean, they didn't leave, but they definitely advocated for lack of a better word, the argument that they made was that they needed to remind themselves of how bad things got so that they didn't go there again. And so I don't want to contest anybody, like how they decide to identify. But it is like, the longer that we continue to use this language, it's just going to continue to perpetuate the issue. But, with that said too, like speaking in language, I think I mentioned this. So this lovely article about young people in recovery, the article right below it says, former heroin addict.
What a horrible headline.
So terrible. Great story. And I love that they highlighted a person in recovery, but
former heroin addict gets hooked on fly fishing. I see what they did there with the hook.
They were trying to be clever, but I had specifically, because it was written, I believe, by the same person. Yeah.
Right.
It was great. I communicated in a casual verbal conversation the importance of that.
Of language.
Yeah. So actually, Tonya and I are working on a consortium here in Durango, Colorado for La Plata County. And one of our first goals is to do some recovery messaging training with media to help educate the media, because we want to share stories of recovery, like local community members, their stories of recovery. And we want to start building events and activities that really support recovery and highlight the positive side of recovery. Because that is the thing too. I think the media, I don't know if it's just like an American culture thing too. Like we love to like highlight the negative.
The drama. Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. So we're really motivated to shift the narrative But yeah, like you can't just tell somebody, like you have to teach somebody why it's important. And then not only why it's important, but like, what are the proper terms to use? What are the terms to avoid?
Right.
And why is this so important? I think,
Yes.
one of the questions I wanted to talk about with you, Tonya, I might be kind of jumping all over the place, but, I'll speak a little bit to my experience with, like, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I had a stigma towards the recovery community because I wasn't one of those people. My father struggled with alcoholism, and I never thought that I was like him. I was like, I'm not like him at all. I'm not an alcoholic. I would never turn out that way. But, from the work that you've done over the years, how do you see stigma creating a barrier for individuals, wanting to access treatment and or recovery?
I think it has a huge impact. I think that anytime we are describing something that sounds like it has a negative outcome to it, why would people want to flock to it? Why do I want to go to treatment if I become, quote, what you said, one of those people, right? And I understand from being a young person, when I came into recovery at 22, it's bad enough that we're all thinking, I'm never going to have any fun again. Who am I going to hang out with? I'm just going to be doomed to a life of boredom, right? Because what am I going to do if I'm not using drugs or alcohol? Yeah. And then you add that stigma component into it. And I think that it really has an impact at keeping people from being willing to access services. And it's hard enough to do that anyway, even without this stigma, but to add that in just creates less willingness to raise my hand and say, yes, I need help, or yes, I would like to know about how to get into treatment or how to live a life in recovery. And, Advocates for Recovery Colorado is a recovery community organization. And so that means for us, that means that all of our services are free, that nobody has to have the barrier of the inability to pay for a service. We help people get into treatment all the time, but let's face it, there is never just like that open line to be able, if somebody comes forward and calls me right now and says, Tonya, I want to go to treatment, I am not able to get them into treatment today. Right. So while that stuff has its own barriers and all of that, what we can do as people in recovery is hold the hand of the person who's reaching out and saying, can I have some help with that? Yeah. And I know that YPR does some of that same stuff. We do. We are considered the statewide RCO in Colorado, the Recovery Community Organization, because we were the first RCO here. We have the longevity, and because we don't charge anybody for anything, and we try to keep everything family friendly. So not all young people have kids. Obviously, I did, 16 and 19. I had babies. But we've got to really be able to think about all of the different age groups and all of the different needs of people and meeting them where they're at. And I think the more stigma is driven into our community, the less people are going to feel comfortable stepping forward and saying, I need help, or I want to be part of that community.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's that on the one hand where people feel like they're a leper of society because of the negative connotations. But then even, talking about access to care, I worked as a peer recovery coach for 2 years, and it was like one of the most frustrating things was finding folks where they're at that stage of change where they're ready, but they need a higher level of care, and having, they're like, I'm ready for change. And the first question you have to ask is, do you have insurance or money? So it's like,
Right.
that's an issue. So, if we can really shift perspectives around substance use disorder, we can shift policies too. I've heard so many people in my community included where people don't, they don't want to like support or vote on certain policies because why should my taxpayer dollars pay for that? And it's like, y'all realize like a lot of these individuals that are high utilizers of emergency departments or frequenting the ER, or I just said that, or frequenting like detox or becoming incarcerated because of their alcohol or drug use, like that's taking our tax dollars where we could sort of reallocate those funds into something that's actually going to be making a change. It's like you're still spending the money, but it's actually like reducing recidivism within the emergency rooms, within jails. And I think that's a piece that needs to sort of be touched on too.
I agree with you.
People, it's like,
yeah.
you guys.
Well, and it goes back to the language we use when we educate people. And, there is this big misbelief out there in the world that go into treatment and living in recovery are the same thing.
Yeah.
That if I go to treatment, I'm in recovery. And,
right.
I've made some people upset by saying this, but one of the things about me is that I'll say almost anything. I'm not scared. So, the way I define that is that treatment happens within four walls and real recovery happens in the community.
Good.
And of course, I could stay abstinent when I was in treatment. That was pretty easy for me. And I know countless others, I did it 4 times. What was important where the rubber meets the road is when I go home. And now where am I connected to? And where are those people in the community where I can get connected in? Because again, we know that the opposite of addiction is connection. Mm-hmm. And so if we're not cultivating our community and providing opportunities for people to come together to celebrate their recovery and to support each other, that is free of charge, right? That there's not a barrier, that I have to be able to go in and be part of that without having that barrier of either I have to have treatment or money or insurance, right, Candace? We got to give people an opportunity to be able to connect. And I think that's the importance of what recovery community organizations are doing.
100%. Yes. Well, so yeah, I guess as we kind of talk about stigma, I don't know. I think we really need to talk a little bit about why, like what language matters. We talked a little bit about it. Yeah. But what are some common words that are often misused? And how can we sort of shift that? Or what are some words that we can use in place of some of those negative connotation words?
So one of the words that jumps out to me always so quickly is junkie. Identifying people as a junkie, and according to definition, I fit that description. That is not a description of who I am today, and so taking away that stigmatizing language.
Dogs are part of life,
Yeah. Well, the other half is home, so they're barking at him out the window. So you guys can edit this out, right?
Oh, we're gonna keep it.
Yeah, we'll keep it. Otherwise, we got to send Aaron on a wild goose chase to flip. Hey. But
so using some of that language that is so negative in the description of it, it's got nothing to do with person first, that I'm a human being before I'm anything. Mm-hmm. And that my addiction does not define who I am as a person, but instead it's just a condition that I have, a brain disease, if you will. So terms like junkie and crackhead and, pothead and all of those kinds of things are so awful in describing people who are living in recovery. So I think about those terms. Those are some of the things we need to stop saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear a lot of people, even in recovery, they identify as my name is so and so, and I'm a dope fiend.
Right.
And it's just such a demoralizing thing to call yourself. I guess they do it. I guess some people say, well, it reminds me, like you said earlier, hey Kiva, there's a doggy. I guess it reminds people, but again, we don't want to continue that narrative or that stigma, because something that new coming in, or maybe something from outside. We definitely not only want to change the language in recovery and in the circle, but also in our communities. And that's really hard to do when we continuously call ourselves such things,
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Let's see here. We got a few more questions for you. And I guess let's see here. Is there anything that shifting use of language matters most? I guess, say that right, Candace?
Anywhere, like in particular.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I hate to point out one place or the other. I think it's impactful all the way around. Like I said, when we're talking about the need for funding, for example, for recovery support services, and how that is impacted by the language that we use. If we walk into our state Congress or even our United States Congress to testify for or against a legislative bill, if I walk in and introduce myself again as a junkie, there's a real good chance nobody's listening. But when I walk in and I introduce myself as a woman living in recovery today, and I talk about how long I've been doing that and what the benefits of that are, I get a completely different ear. And so, that's really important. I think also with our healthcare providers, it's important. How do we expect to be treated with dignity and respect by the medical field if we ourselves come in using language like that to describe ourselves? I think about people who are trying to find employment. And like you had mentioned earlier, Jesse, about sometimes there's this gap in our employment because of our active addiction. And I have to sell myself to this employer. And if I walk in using that stigmatizing language, the chances of me getting hired are slim to none. I want to go to college. I want to apply for grants to do that. I want to rent a house, or I want to own my own home. None of this stigmatizing language helps us to move forward in our lives. And I think that, that is why it's so important to shift the language.
Absolutely. I would say, leading into the last couple of questions here, as we're kind of coming to a close, I think you did talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, Candace, we talked about advocates for recovery. Can you give us kind of like what it is you do, ground zero there, and
Sure.
Kind of a little bit of a backdrop?
Absolutely. So as a recovery community organization, we provide peer recovery coaching. We do that in both individual settings and in group settings. We too host all recovery meetings, and like YPR, we call them that because everybody is welcome. We support all pathways of recovery, and we believe that people are in recovery when they say they are. We don't get into, you have to come to my way of thinking. We just want inclusion. We want people to know that that is a safe place to be. And we do a lot of recovery social activities. So we just planned planned
Nice.
our big Christmas party. We're going to do that on December 18th at our office in the Denver metro area. And, having opportunities for people to come together where they can build new friendships and new relationships and get connected to new people that are like-minded is so critically important. The last part that we do is that we really are the voice for the recovery community in the state of Colorado. So I personally do a lot of advocacy and work with the legislators and do a lot of policy work. And honestly, I love it because I had somebody ask me in the last couple of months, well, how did you get to be the person who does that? And I said, I stepped into the role. Nobody else was doing it, right?
Yes.
Because of shame and stigma, people sometimes have a tendency to stay in the shadows. And again, the go big or stay home girl, right? I'm like, no, I want to tell people about recovery, about the benefits, about the gifts that it brings into lives. And so, I've been doing that for almost 20 years in the state of Colorado, and I'm very passionate about the advocacy pieces. So, what I really want people to know, if you have an audience from people in Colorado that are listening, is pick up the phone because we are just like you, or show up at one of our offices and come by and walk in the door. One of the things I love about our Denver office is that it's in a house. So it's an old rock house. So you walk into the hallway and you come into the living room and there's the fireplace and the couches and there's a dining room and a kitchen, and we use the bedrooms as our offices. And because we've grown and expanded, we've had to create another building out further on our property for more offices. But that's what I hear from people is they walk in the door, and I've had so many people say to me, I feel like I'm at home. And my response to that is, you are. I say to the people that we work with all the time, this is not my house. I might be the executive director, but what I want you guys to hear is this is our house. And so we've had people that have made a picture, right? They've drawn or made something. And I will say to them, so you figure out where it should go and hang it on the wall. This is our house.
I love it.
I want you to decorate our house. So just that's really the core of who we are and what we're doing. And we have gotten some funding in the last couple of years that has really allowed us to expand. So now we have our office in the Denver metro. It really is right on the line of Adams County and Denver County. We've got another office that's in Aurora, Colorado. There was just a shooting this past weekend where some teenagers were shot in Aurora. The cross streets were Colfax and Dayton, and our office is a block from there. And you know what? There's a reason that we need to be right there. Right? You guys understand what I'm saying. We have another office that is on the western slope that's in Montrose, Colorado, and we have one that's in the eastern northeast part of Colorado in Sterling. And we just got funding to put in some new offices and are looking to get some additional funding for the western slope to be able to go to places like Durango, where we can work with Candace, somebody who that's her community, and be there. So whatever the question is, if AFR Colorado doesn't know the answer, we'll find it.
Very nice. Good touch. I love the stuff about the artwork and having that homey feel and making people feel comfortable, because when you first come into recovery, or maybe not even recovery, if you're just like even willing to give it a shot, you don't know. I think that comfort level is very important. Whether it's a treatment center, whether it's an advocacy place, whether it's a drop-in center, how you're first welcomed really is going to dictate your barriers and your walls from coming down. And I know I've come into some places where it wasn't so warm. Why do I want to be here? And I've come in other places where it was very, very warm, and I was taken in. And you know what? I was up for a few days. I probably didn't smell the greatest. I was living on the streets, and they loved on me when I couldn't even love myself. So hats off to you, Tonya. We really
Thank you.
appreciate what you're doing over there in Denver and that surrounding area. I think Candace is going to take over from here, and we have a really important question coming up for you.
Yeah, best question that we ask every guest. And you sort of answered it at the beginning of this episode, but I think this is an ever evolving and it can be answered in multiple ways. So without further ado, we want to hear from you. What does recovery mean to you?
That's a big question, and I think it has a lot of answers. But the first thing that comes to my mind is peace. Having peace of mind, having that peace that happens on the inside. Like, all this stuff can happen on the outside, but my recovery today is about how I feel on the inside. My first AA sponsor, we talked about Mildred. She used to say to me, this is all about Tonya being comfortable in Tonya's skin. And that really had an impact on me. And I think from that place of peace, then we're able to have the other components, which are like stability, and that can be a stable employment, or the ability to be an attentive student if I'm going to college, or whatever kind of school I might be enrolled in. Having a stable place to live, a place that's recovery conducive, where I lay my head down and rest at night. I, like Jesse, was one of those people that would be awake for days and days and days, and then just be paranoid as hell, and really not taken for granted what it means to be able to lay down and go to sleep and not have to sleep with one eye open, and to be able to rejuvenate so that I can continue to have that peace tomorrow. And through that, I'm able to help people and hold people's hands and feel like it's okay for me to step forward as the voice of recovery in the state of Colorado, and bring that to other people. So again, I think it's way beyond putting down the drugs and the alcohol. That's only the first step in that. And real recovery is about living at peace and being able to have stability in my life.
That's a good answer. I don't think I've heard peace before. That was really good.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer a lot. Thank you so much. Yeah. It's always so much fun to hear everybody's perspective. And sometimes we hear some people say the same answer, but they have a different spin on it. So thank you.
This has been an incredible opportunity. I appreciate you guys so much, and what you're doing, and you guys doing the, putting these podcasts out there, because we need the message of recovery to be available in lots of different ways, so that people all over the place can hear it and see it and be able to talk about it.
Heck yeah. You know what? Today was a great cast. I'm really happy to meet you, Tonya. And good things come from Texas. And I'm headed that way here pretty soon. I thank you so much for talking to us about stigma and different words do matter. And we're super excited to see what happens more going on in your neck of the woods. Before we go, is there anything you want to shout out, any special people, or maybe where can they find you? Where can they find your agency again? Kind of restate where you guys are at.
Absolutely. So our main campus is in Denver at 6981 Federal Boulevard in Denver. Our website is www.advocatesforrecovery.org. We're on Facebook as well as Instagram and Twitter. You can search for us by putting in Advocates for Recovery Colorado Nonprofit on Facebook. And we've also set up pages for our offices in Aurora and Montrose and Sterling. And so we're out there. If all else fails, call the phone number 720-389-6393. Somebody's there to answer the phone. If we're not there and we're all caught up in meetings, somebody will call you back. I promise.
Nice. Very nice. Thank you so much, Tonya. We want to thank all you guys for listening, or maybe you're watching. We are finally on the YouTube location. So you get to see the ginger. It's a pretty special thing. But remember, you guys, if you have any topics or any ideas you would like us to discuss on the show, you can always email us at recoverycorner@youngpeopleinrecovery.org, or maybe you just want to complain, like Jesse needs the tan. Send us an email, and we'll work on it as best we can.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tonya. Once again, we are your hosts, Candace Rose
and Jesse Hayner.
And new episodes are available to stream every other Wednesday as early as 5 a.m. Eastern Time. So be sure to tune in on March 9th with Maggie Saldine, who's the Executive Director at High Rockies Harm Reduction. She's joining us to discuss harm reduction in rural communities. As always, here at YPR, we do recover and we are in your corner. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tonya.